everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Untold Truth. It's so good to have all of you back. Tonight is a very special night. Tonight, I'm sitting down with my very special friend, Dante D. King, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. And tonight, we will be discussing his book, The 400-Year Holocaust, and some of the critical work that he has been doing in the US and been um, writing that can definitely inform and speak to some of the issues that we have and have been dealing with in South Africa. And so, Dante, welcome to the program. Welcome to the conversation. It's so good to have you here. How are you doing, my brother?
Thank you very much. I'm excited to finally be sitting down with you and engaging in this discussion. I really am. We've been planning it for some time.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really good to have you. And this hour normally goes by very quickly. And so we're not going to waste any time because we want to milk as much as we can out of you so we can use it in this country. And hopefully, this introduction will also be the first step to getting you to come and visit our shores and come and see what we have and what we're dealing with out here. Okay.
Wow, for sure.
So let's start off, Dante. I mean, this book, just to give people a little bit of background, I was in a rut with my PhD and writing my work for my PhD, and it was your book um, that helped me to regain my spirit to deal with white supremacy in South Africa and to just pick up my pen again and get
Wow.
going. And so the book has a significant presence for me for doing that. And that was almost a year ago again. So please tell me about writing this book and why it was so important for you to pen this on paper.
Well, uh, where do I start? The book served as a coping mechanism or outlet. Writing the book actually served that place, I guess, or process or mechanism for me to express in my life. I was fed up with what I see here in the United States of America concerning Black people. Once I began to understand just how entrenched we are in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, from both a legal, sociocultural, psychosocial standpoint, um, it really began to eat at my spirit. And so I was at a place in my life where I was considering suicide because of the agony of being Black in America and what that represents, and also from what we experience from it, or as a result of it. And I just needed an outlet to express. And I meant the book um, as a last will and testament because I was, as I just mentioned, about to check out of here.
That's scary and powerful. That circumstances literally pushed you to your limits where life was not even worth living anymore. And I think a lot of people deal with that on a daily, and hopefully this will be a great way to also give them hope in just sticking it out and joining us in this fight. And so I'm jumping back into the book, and I'm for those watching and tuning in with us. The format tonight is that I'll be reading snippets from the book, and then Dante will talk to us about that snippet. And so I'm starting right at the beginning of the book where you write the following. Please remember that white supremacy culture, which is whiteness, which includes white people and racial groups who have been prioritized above African Americans in the white American racial hierarchy, requires your daily subjugation by those who deem themselves superior to your culture, morally, physically, mentally, intellectually, and ideologically. White identity was created as a juxtaposition to black identity and is inherently dependent upon anti-blackness. Talk to us about that.
Uh, so you said a lot. I didn't know you were going to go to that quote, but it's so true when you study the nature and the language of laws during the colonial era, and this is spoken to or written to rather in books such as White Over Black, which is was produced by Winthrop Jordan, Ibram Kendi's book Stamped from the Beginning. You don't see the language white um, being used in a formal sense or any commercial sense um, until 1681, and it's in a law concerning marriage. And prior to the transition from Christian to white, and I'll give you a quick example of this, they are assigning racial privilege or privilege and value to European ethnic identities, but yet they're still referring to them as Christian, okay? Um, and everyone during this period is being converted into Christianity, but they're clarifying distinctly and specifically who they are referring to and intending to assign value to in terms of an identity. So I'll give you one example. This is on the precipice of like a full um, a full transition over to the identity of white and or whiteness from Christianity. So this law says, and if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave, and shall happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be accounted felony, but the master, owner, and every such other person so giving correction shall be free and acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same, as if such accident had never happened. And also, if any Negro, mulatto, or Indian, bond or free, shall at any time lift his or her hand in opposition against any Christian, not being Negro, mulatto, or Indian, he or she so offending shall for every such offense, proved by the oath of the party, receive on his or her bare back 30 lashes, well laid on, cognizable by a justice of the peace for that county wherein such offense shall be committed. Okay. And so they're saying that these people cannot resist terrorism. They cannot resist any mistreatment that's being thrust upon them by non-Indian, non-Black Christian people, so by Europeans. And they're distinctly clarifying who they're speaking to or speaking about. And so you have, by a very precise, alacritous legal process, value being assigned and privileges being assigned to the Europeans of different ethnic backgrounds, and value being taken away, stripped away from Black and non-European people. And it is very systematic. It's very procedural in the way that it is being, these actions are taking place and rendered, they're closing loopholes. So you see the distortion, I guess, and the delusional nature, the terroristic nature of whiteness being designed. It's being designed legally, and that shapes culture. It shapes cultural behavior. It shapes the cultural psychology. And in this, there's also the shaping and making of what it means to be Negro and Black, because these African people are not Negro. They are Ghanaian. They are, Nigerian. They are Cameroonian. They're not Negro, but this is what is created because specifically under English colonial rule, they become very preoccupied in a very unrelenting fashion with the darker skinned people who are occupying the Western coast of Africa. And so they begin to refer to them in these terms that they really consider and relate to in very derogatory ways.
Yeah. That's the description of what you put together in that bit is so disturbing in the fact that black people were made to be an object to be discarded as you wished without any significant punishment to the one dishing out this harm, this vile um, murdering and hurting of black people without cause. For the most part, when it was inflicted, it was without cause. So it was depending on the feeling you had on the day. When master feels like dishing out, he's dishing out. And I mean that's the history that developed the culture that we now refer to, that you are referring to, that we are now struggling to undo.
Absolutely. And you can see the psychopathic nature, what Dr. Bobby Wright, who was a psychologist, a Black psychologist in the 1970s, he referred to as the psychopathic racial personality. And so you can see the extremes of it, the extremities of these actions, and actually really the need, which is undergird by an underlying fear and paranoia that white people possess during this period. They felt these are things that they felt that they had to do, such as implementing laws that required and constituted the castration of Black men who ran away from slavery. You've got a number of combination of both legislation and judicial decisions moving through the juridical process to constitute that Black women, because they are Black and their Blackness represents immorality, that they can't be raped. And you've got judges deciding in this fashion. And that psychology, that type of maniacal, diabolical psychology and perverted nature is still with us. We see it in the Ron DeSantis, who's the current governor of one of the states here, Florida, who's currently running for president. He just announced his bid for president. He's attempting to ban books like mine that tell the history of Black people. He's stated openly that white people don't need to be made to feel uncomfortable. And that's exactly what I'm mapping out in my book. This nature of a lack of empathy, a lack of remorse, a lack of compassion, and a lack of a need to feel any way whatsoever that would potentially lead to accountability, self-accountability, institutional, structural, and cultural accountability. And so Dr. Bobby Wright says that white people are psychopathic when it comes to Black people, and they have no morality when it comes to Black people, where race is the variable.
Wow. All I'm thinking, Dante, is they call it the land of the free and the brave. And then the question is, free for who and bravery of whom? Because people like yourself are not being accepted for your bravery, and yet others are. So who, you know, who they referring to?
It is the land of psychopaths with authority. And I'm going to
Mm,
say that again because people want to characterize these individuals using different language and terms, forefathers, leaders, power political figures. No, this is the land of psychopaths with authority. And I think it's so important to trace what I'm saying back to the colonial period because it provides a very in-depth view and understanding of the ways in which whiteness as a cultural organization developed and
yeah,
what was located, what was assigned to and begin to be developed and located um, in the white value system, in the white cultural value system. And so when you can understand it from that standpoint, and then understand how, for example, President Thomas Jefferson, who's the third president of the United States, they sanitize and really fantasize, I guess, fantasize rather, or romanticize a story where he owned this Black woman who was mixed race. She was his wife's half sister, Sally Hemings, and how, they fell in love and he just really adored and loved her and they had children together. And I often compel people to this day in age, because that was literally what, 200 years ago. So I compel people to think about, would you call a situation where a grown man assumed responsibility for your 6-year-old daughter, 5, 6-year-old daughter, because that's when she went to live with them, and he groomed her? And by the age of roughly 13 or 14, he's in his 40s, she's 13 or 14, and he begins having sex with her. And by, her late teens, early 20s, she's got several children by this man. Would you call that a love story? I call
Yeah,
it pedophilia. As someone, and this is my story, as someone who has been a victim of pedophilia that happened to me during my childhood, I call it pedophilia. I call it rape. I call it even prostitution and sexual abuse, because there's nowhere in that situation where she has the right to consent or not consent. He owns her, and so we need to take to task the sanitizing of whiteness, of white culture, of white history, of American history, and what it even means to be American.
yeah.
And that's what I'm striving to do in my work.
Wow. And well, more power to you for doing that work. And yeah, it's that's something that you're highlighting there that's very critical for us to understand, because that sanitizing of that white identity and the impact of whiteness on the black body over a long period of time that has passed since, um, is what holds and upholds white supremacy to continue as is without accountability, because the sanitizing take place. And so if we don't have the courage to have these conversations that you and I are having right now, and saying the things that we are saying, knowing that there might be repercussions, then obviously whiteness will just flourish and continue to operate as is. And so yeah, I think it's critical that we have these conversations. And so I am jumping back into the book and I'm putting a statement, and then we're moving from there. Um, this one says, um, the main difference between 1962, or sorry, though many will claim to be allies or working on behalf of equity and justice, they are not. Part of their identities within the context of white American race and the ethnic hierarchical obsession, whether they know it or not, is that their self worth and value is measured by their proximity to whiteness and away from blackness. Speak to me about that.
Absolutely. And in doing so, I'm actually going to use, for an example, um, a colonial law in 1664 in Maryland. The last one I shared was from Virginia. This one is from Maryland, that literally serves to strip the value of Black men away by making them slaves. And you can see inherent within this example, inherent within this law, is a jealousy of Black men, what Black men are presenting in terms of a challenge, and also um, a detractor from them being able to incorporate white culture and whiteness in America. And they need to have complete access to white women to be able to do it. And so during this period in 16, 30s, 40s, 50s Maryland, white women were marrying Black men, women of European descent. And so here's what they say in this law. They say, be it enacted by the right honorable, the Lord Proprietary, by the advice and consent of the upper and lower house of this present General Assembly, that all Negroes or other slaves already within the province, and all Negroes and other slaves to be hereafter imported into the province, shall serve durante vita, hard labor for life. And so when you strip away the value of an entire group of people by making them slaves, by diminishing their personhood and their humanity through a process of debasement, that is a stripping away of value that they can never recover, because everyone in society then begins to relate to them on those terms, by those terms.
Yeah.
And so if you incorporate or integrate into this culture, and all of your values, all of your models for progress, all of what you want to become has been constituted by white people who say, in order to have value, in order to have success, you need to sound like this, you need to learn like this, you need to express like this. This is the education that makes you intelligent and knowledgeable and educated, competent. If that is all located upon and or in within and within the white value and cultural structure in terms of our model, then anything that does not fit into that model is seen as a deviant, okay? And so having relationships, there is no inherent value of having any relationships with Black men or Black women in America. And that was true in 1664 Maryland. It's also true today. But the motivations of these white men, particularly these Englishmen at the time, before they started using the language white, they say, and all children born of any Negro or other slave shall be slaves as their fathers were, for the term of their lives, and for as much as diverse freeborn English women, forgetful of their free condition, and to the disgrace, they're calling it a disgrace, of our nation, marry Negro slaves, by which also diverse suits may arise touching the issue of such women, and a great damage befalls the master of such Negroes. So if you marry them and then you happen to cause a disruption to what we're trying to do, and that's going to cause an issue for the master, because by law, in some instances, these Black men would become free based on their association and or marriage to these European women. So they say, for deterring such freeborn women from such shameful matches. You look, just notice the language: disgrace, shameful, right? Be it further enacted by the authority, advice, and consent aforesaid, that whatsoever freeborn woman shall marry any slave from and after the last day of this present assembly shall serve the master of such slave during the life of her husband. And they also went on to say, and I won't go into it, but that if that wasn't enough to, really serve as a demotivator or to demotivate these white women from marrying these Black men, then their children would also be enslaved as well.
Wow, that's a lot, eh? And I think it speaks what I like about how you do this work. And those who will in future get the book, and please do get the book. Um, you use the historical accuracy or something to that effect. And history is obviously something that you can take as you wish because there's multiple versions available, but you trace back the most acceptable accounts of history, and accepted by the so-called experts in the field, and you substantiate what you write in this book based on those historical aspects, and that for me is brilliant because I think once you connect it to what actually took place in history and most people accept that account, it's very difficult to deny that this is the reality of why we're in the position that we are. currently in the world. And so that, I think, brings an extra piece of substance to it. And maybe say something about how you put that together with using the historical aspect to highlight the problems that we're dealing with in modern day society.
Well, I'll be brief, because you are exactly right. My approach is an examination of the legal system. It's an examination, an interrogation, and a very analytical critique of legality at the colonial level, later the state level, at the local level concerning ordinances, as well as at the federal level. You know, for example, in 1850, the United States Congress introduces and signs in or moves forward, and it is signed into the law by the then president at that time, the Fugitive Slave Act, which deputized every white person in the United States to be a policing authority on for concerning Black people that they suspected had run away from racism. All they had to do was suspect. And in many cases, and you see this, for example, in the book, 12 Years a Slave, concerning Solomon Northup, who actually was abducted and then sold into slavery in a southern state. Um, you see it in that story that this was something that white people were incentivized to do, because if they suspected that these Black people ran away from slavery, they could have them turned in to a bounty hunter. They could have them turned in and sold at a slave auction. Judges were given roughly, I think, $10 for every person that they remanded into slavery that went before the courts, and they were given $5 if they released them. So what do you think the judges did? Because it
Yeah,
was economically beneficial for them to remand these suspected slaves back into slavery. And so here you have white people who are authorized to turn in any Black person in this country. You know, and I often ask the question to white people, how many of you would trust another, if you were Black during this period, how many of you would trust white people? You wouldn't trust any, because you
yeah,
have a cultural relationship that is being developed through on legal ground, where there is every reason to not only distrust these people, to fear them. And you know, I really, when I think about what the Black people were going through during that time, and I also think about where we are today and what we are going through today, the level of panic, the level of anxiety, the allostatic load that this causes, the exhaustion and the fear. These are cultural variables that undergird the Black experience in this country. And we are surrounded by maniacs who don't know that they are maniacs and that they've been socialized in these ways. Instead, we want to focus on Hitler while not understanding that every white person in this country has been socialized like Adolf Hitler and does harm and has been given the permission by the United States federal government and local police authorities who don't enforce the law whenever Black people are, you know, assaulted and or murdered, such as what we've just seen with Banko Brown here in San Francisco, where he was assaulted by the Walgreens security guard, and then the security guard decided to shoot him because Banko spit at him, Banko being unarmed. We saw it with Jordan Neely on the New York subway, and the lack of charges. They let the white person go free, right? It is a recipe for total disruption to a community and Black genocide, which is why I, you know, in the subtitle of my book, I named it White America's Legal, Psychopathic, and Sociopathic Black Genocide, because this is a culture that inherent within its value system has trained everyone, generation by generation by generation, through the law, to be against Black people, which is why I focus on legalized anti-Blackness.
Wow. Wow. That's so much you said there, man. And I think what I'm hearing a lot is I'm almost envisioning the framework for capitalism, um, and how whiteness falls within that space of, as long as you enhance anti-blackness and you promote the reward to whiteness, whether it's monetary, whether it's whatever resource that you have available, that in that act in itself developed the system which is white supremacy today. And therefore we constantly have to also highlight the impact of capitalism and how that feeds into whiteness and the promotion of anti-black racism and how it is perpetuated continuously. And important to say, especially to South Africans that tune in and listen to us and that will see this video, that it is the same type of colonial behavior, thinking, attitudes that was transferred from the West to Africa and to South Africa. And those whites tend to hold the same type of socialization that they reenacted and then still hold across the world.
Well said. Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Amos Wilson, in his work around the falsification of African consciousness, which is a book that was produced in the either the late 80s or 90s. But he discusses anti-Blackness as both psychopolitical and psychoeconomic organization. So there's a politic behind anti-Blackness. And America being founded upon anti-Black institutions, an anti-Black value system, an anti-Black legal system, an anti-Black economic system that thrives on Black suffering and pain. You know, slavery, as we refer to it here in America, is only one iteration of that, right? But you have to understand that in assigning value to white people, to white culture, to the white community, and taking away value, that impacts everything. And so therefore, we don't feel that Black people deserve as much pay for equal work or even more work than white people. We inherently have been socialized and programmed to see Black people as worth less.
Yeah.
Worth less. And so if you have a school, for example, where it's predominantly Black children, it's going to be perceived inherently as an inferior school. As a Black school, it's inferior. It's not as good as the other schools. If you have, we see this even in home appraisals. And I refer to at least 5 to 6 examples, recent examples over the last several years, where these Black people who are either middle class, upper middle class, and or affluent, they're having their homes appraised. And yet, when they have their home appraised, and they stand in, the house is being appraised for a third up to half of what it is valued. And yet when they have a white friend or family member or neighbor stand in on their behalf, the appraisal skyrocketed, right? So this is embedded into a psychology. And that is why I relate so much to, Dr. Bobby Wright's work around it being a psychopathic psychology. We are literally trained, to hate Black people in this country. And if I may, Edwin, can I share just a few slides that speak to this?
Yeah.
That I share in my lecture. So I define anti-Blackness in my book, and I'm not sure if you were going to get to this, but in the more revised version, I say that anti-Blackness is a white American legal, social, cultural, economic, institutional values, and belief system. So take that in. It's in the belief system. So no policy or set of laws are going to be able to change or affect something that has been institutionalized in one's belief system. It involves the deprioritization of humans labeled as Black people, as well as the criminalization, hypernegativity, hyperscrutiny, and negative positioning of Black people and or Blackness throughout all aspects of American society and life. For the purposes, it serves a purpose of justifying and rationalizing political, social, cultural, economic debasement and inhumane treatment, and ultimately genocide. So if you situate any community, any group of people within this type of dynamic of debasement and hypernegativity, hyperscrutiny, you can rationalize any treatment of those individuals. And so I say then, and I'm going to skip ahead because I have some quotes by some of our presidents that, basically say, Black people, yes, we understand through scientific academic principle that Black people are inferior. They back that up. And this flows through the Hispanic, Latinx community, through the Asian community, even the Black community. And so therefore, American culture socializes and trains people to develop and possess innate psychological and emotional reflexes and impulses that automatically react negatively to Black people, especially Black people who do not conform to and or emulate white sociocultural standards, okay? And so it is inherent within our reflexes and impulses, a compulsion to do this harm.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%, my brother. I think it's and obviously your book is written within the US based context, but I mean you can say that for South Africa as well. I think it is so common. And that's the thing that people don't understand. It was transferred. It was taken from the context of the US or the West, and it was transferred to Africa, and so it is perpetuated mostly and more often than not in the same way. And so we have the same tendencies in this country where we operate and function with that same reflexes that you are talking about and that same way of acting or enacting our belief system when we are dealing with Black people and people with darker skin specifically. And so that speaks a lot of power and truth to power. I want to throw this in, and just coming from the side and from the chat is um, to ask if you would comment on how whiteness hijacks immigrants into the mythology of greatness of the US and the importance of the proximity of whiteness.
For sure. So if you juxtapose that 1664 law that stripped away the value of Black men against assigning and ascribing value to white men and to white women, people who come here who want to integrate into American culture, that is, really code for wanting to become more like white people. You come to America because you want to be American, right? And so you want to integrate into a culture that has been developed through Eurocentricity by an organization of people who call themselves white. So you want to be more like white people. And so you feel that the closer that you are in proximity, that you have more value that is assigned and ascribed to you, and inherent within that are more privileges. And it is very true. I just was doing a training yesterday with Robin DiAngelo, and one of the Asian women in the course, when we were doing racial caucusing, she said, wow, I just really don't have this experience that the Black people are naming. These things don't happen to me. And I said that this is such a profound admission and vulnerability in demonstration of vulnerability by you sharing this, because oftentimes it can be presumed that because someone is not white, that they're experiencing racism along similar lines or along the same lines as Black people. And we know that that is not true. And I've heard a lot of Asian people express to me during either from my students or other lectures or workshops that I've given that they feel like they are below the radar, that they're not seen, they're under the radar. And I really, compare that or contrast it to the ways in which we are very conspicuous in this culture. We can't be under the radar ever because we have this, you know, immutable defect, that has been sanctioned in that manner through the white psychosis that we can't escape. So wow, I would love to feel like I'm under the radar and not being seen in any way. Instead, that privilege is not afforded to people who look like me. And so these people actually, benefit in similar ways that white people do, and feel no two ways about it. And yet, here's the bottom line though, Edwin. None of these people will ever be known for doing anything great outside of serving the interests of the white men who control this culture and its institutions. It's not going to build you some monumental legacy that you came to America from China and you became, this great Chinese person that did XYZ. You will always be known with an association to a white American institution and through that identity. And so it really doesn't serve you or your family in any way, to try to separate or dissociate yourself from Black people or people that you think, because you suffer from the same psychosis as everyone in this culture. You think you're better than Black people. In some way, shape, or form, that provides you a level of comfort, self-esteem, confidence. I mean, it's all distorted, perverted, and delusional.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. And I guess for the most part, most people are comfortable living with that because of the comforts that it offers them. And so that's the crazy part, because like you said, it won't get you very far in life in terms of what life really means and what you're supposed to be doing on earth with your life. But I guess in the measly living of just consuming daily and being part of society, you'll be fine, but you won't have the necessary impact that is basically expected from all human beings to have while you lived on this earth. And so, yeah,
And can I just add too
yeah,
that, Black people are not exempted from this equation. I'm not here today speaking as an authority or, as someone who is outside of this culture. I suffer or have suffered from and fight against the same psychosis and delusional behavior that has been incorporated into this societal structure, into this societal
yeah,
value system, belief system, and cultural structure. And Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, I often refer to his work because he interrogated this. He began to interrogate this in the 1950s in a book that was titled The Black Bourgeoisie. And what he says, I see that the Negroes who are gaining, more economic status, who believe that they are gaining more political status, they are deciding to separate themselves from the masses of Negroes. And he says, but they can't escape it. They can't escape it. You want to know why? Because they have the same mark of oppression as those lower class, non-white associated Negroes, non-white associated acting Negroes that they have. And so when it comes time, to go, for example, to your home, and you are suspected by your neighbors to be breaking into your home, and yet
Yeah.
you are a Harvard professor with a doctorate degree, Skip Gates, you can't escape it either. Even though you've moved out the neighborhood, you don't talk like, act like, the larger number of the non-educated, unintellectual Negroes. So there's so much that needs to happen in terms of psychic and emotional healing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this country is headed for total destruction because it was founded upon principles of hatred, and now we see that hatred turning inward.
Wow. I, I, yeah, all I have right now is saying you need to be coming to South Africa and we need to have this conversation in person over a couple of days because time is just going like mad, like a Formula One car. And there's like a ton of this that I still need to get through to. So let me see if I can squeeze in one or two more and we can speak to that. Obviously there's a lot of criticism towards your work, specifically because America is a predominantly white country, and so whiteness dominates the norm, standards, and culture over there. And so you write the following: I do not care about the feelings of or criticisms of whites or people who present themselves as white. Those who ignore facts do not get my attention. Nothing they say or do to thwart me as I educate the public will work because I am bolstered by demonstrable proof. Even if I am murdered for my work, it will persist. That is why I have written my thoughts down. Bodies perish, words do not. And that for me, it's so powerful when you say that. Um, but yeah, just highlight some of the criticism and how you've been able to get past that, writing this in this way.
I really have isolated myself in ways where I try to not pay attention to it, especially with people who have not read my book all the way, or who have not studied and tapped into many of the resources that I include in the bibliography of the book, or people who are just unstudied in this area. It's of no use of my time, attention, or effort, and it doesn't serve a purpose for them or for me to even begin to engage. And so I noticed that when the book was first published, I did receive a lot of comments, that reflected the white psychosis and the anti-Black hatred that I speak about through in my book. And I would sit back and I started screenshotting some of the examples, screenshotting some of the comments rather, because it was just, I mean, I literally could publish another book with the screenshots, titled, the hatred that I received from publishing my book. um, but I really, I mean, what you read in that passage says it all.
Yeah. Well, at least you have our support from this side. So we are with you, my brother.
Thank
Um,
you.
two areas that I want to touch. And as we run out of time and we're going down this final moment. The one is the letter you wrote to Spike Lee, and his influence. As we know, he's done some significant work for Black people in America, and then um, on top of that, you end or in the final pages, towards the final pages of the book, you have some recommendations. And so this is a learning course that you do in this book, and you have recommendations on how we can achieve the type of goals that you highlighted was problematic in how the country was established, but also how we get out of this. So in our final stages, the letter to Spike Lee and your recommendations on how we can do better as a country and as a nation.
So, that Spike Lee reflection was so powerful for me because, as I mentioned, that movie came out when I was a child. I was, I believe, even a preteen when that movie came out. And I had to go back, once my consciousness evolved, I would go back and watch it at different times. And it just had developed new meaning for me. And so, I mean, if you know Spike and you're in touch with him, please send him a copy of my book, Edwin. But that the scene at the end where Lawrence Fishburne's character screams "Wake up." We really need a wake up call. And Dr. Amos Wilson, going back to his work, he says that because we have an absence of knowledge of history, we have a misinterpretation of reality. And I believe so many Black and non-white people in this culture, um, they are living in a delusion, not knowing that they are living in and through a delusion.
Yeah,
And they don't understand the volatility of white culture and its institutions. And so, therefore, being dominated and marginalized by white people, we are subjects. We are still owned by them through these institutions, through their culture, through their value belief system. And if we were really to wake up, by doing and going through an analytical um, and evaluative process, which is what I try to provide in my courses, we can really begin to have a better, more realistic and on point interpretation of where we are in this moment, as well as where we're headed. I want to say to the question about the strategies and the solutions that I included in chapter 10, I just changed my background. I just released the 400-Year Holocaust Toolkit and Workbook, which actually expands on chapter 10, and it gives specific tangible examples of things that organizations and leaders can incorporate into their organizations to move forward anti-racism work and produce racially equitable outcomes. And yet I have to be honest, I didn't want to write chapter 10. I didn't even want to publish this workbook, but my publishing coach, she said to me, you have to give people hope. You have to provide some pathway forward, or else people are going to read your book and become depressed, or even worse, they may want to end up committing suicide because it's just too um it's too blunt. The
yeah.
information that I'm sharing, it can overwhelm and really overtake people. So the 400-Year Holocaust Toolkit and Workbook is out now or available for pre-orders. You can either go to my website at danteking.com or flash this QR code and purchase it directly from Lulu. It should be available within the next 2 to 3 weeks on all the global retailers like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and so on.
Awesome. Well, that speaks to a lot of what we wanted to say tonight, but I definitely am very convinced that we need to bring you to South Africa, and we need to have a good time together and work together to get to the bottom of a lot of things that it's interrelated and transnational when it comes to our countries. There's time for one more to throw in there, and it comes from the chat here. Um, what can immigrants or the people that you were mentioning earlier, like the Chinese, Asian people, the Irish, Germans, Italians, people that can easily conform to whiteness, and don't necessarily view themselves as black or people of color. How do they support the cause better? Or what can they do to improve how they show up as allies? And I think it deals with some of the hope that we want to leave people with in terms of what we expect them to do and how we expect them to show up.
Yeah. Please refer to chapter 10 in my book. But some things I'll say, basic things. Sorry. Some basic things that I'll name are um making sure that you listen to Black people, you really pay attention to our body language, which many times what we feel and how we're impacted by certain things, they show up on our face or in our body language. Build capacity, build racial stamina and the capacity to be able to notice racism and be willing to say something about it, or better yet, become active in ways where you are working as a co-conspirator to produce tangible, meaningfully tangible results. I mean, that's what it is. That's what you can do. And I say to white people who have been given everything in terms of their opportunity, their status, positionality, economic standing, that if you are someone of a high economic status, middle class or affluent, donate to Black families. Just give handouts. Because if you were Black, you most likely would not be where you are in life. You wouldn't be in that position. You most likely would not have gone to those schools because you would not have been able to access or have been supported by the mentorship, the people who opened doors for you, the full network that you had. You would have been dealing with societal issues of people seeing you through a negative orientation that would have diminished your opportunities and abilities to thrive. So you most likely wouldn't be where you are. So nothing that you've gotten has just been based upon the fact that you are a smart, intellectual, hardworking individual. It is because of your whiteness. So give to Black people. Give to Black people. That is what you can do.
Wow. And on that note, Dante, my friend, thank you for doing this conversation with me. Thank you for offering your time. We appreciate you, appreciate your work. Folks, that has been another brilliant episode of The Untold Truth. And we were discussing the 400-year Holocaust by Dante D. King. It's something that you definitely need to invest in and definitely need to spend some time with, because it's something that's really going to expose your thinking and your mind for greater things and how to be better committed to the process of fighting racism and standing together united as a Black community across transnational borders to make sure that at some point we'll make an end or at least a dent into the white supremacist system that have robbed so many of us of our identity, our language, our culture, and more important, our belonging in this country and every other country on the planet. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining me and Dante. Dante, all the best with the work. We support your work. We love your work. We love you, and we hope to have you in South Africa soon.
Thank you so much. I sorry, this is I think maybe an alarm or something. I apologize. Um, but thank you so much for having me here. Um, And thank you, Edwin, for all of your work, the work that you are doing as a leader in this work over there. I know it can feel isolating sometimes, but you really and truly are brilliant. And thank you for your support. I hope that we can have a part two because I would love to hear. I saw the book marked up and it just did something to me. It grabbed me. It sent chills through my body because I would love to hear some of those additional pieces that you marked up.
Absolutely, and we will definitely make time for part two. And this recording will be available within the next couple of weeks. And so we'll be sharing it on all social media platforms, and with yourself and also with your followers. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.